Good evening again, everyone, and good Yontif. In 1952, the following was written in our synagogue newsletter, The Message. Quote, beginning next Friday evening, March 28th, 1952, our Pulowski Rauch Auditorium will finally be air-conditioned. Please remember, it's impossible to suit everybody in fixing the temperature of the auditorium. The ladies will help us if they will bring their wraps with them so they might feel more comfortable in the cooler temperature of our synagogue. Rabbi Malev, however, promises to make it hot for the sinners in the course of his sermon. I'm glad I wasn't the senior rabbi in 1952. I can't imagine if it was ever written, Rabbi Strauss promises to make it hot for the sinners in the course of his sermon. Rabbi Malev came to Beth Yeshurun in 1946 as our first rabbi and went on to become one of the most outstanding rabbis in the United States. Rabbis of his generation were traditionally placed on a high pedestal. Rabbi Malev was regarded by many in our congregation with godlike reverence. He was to many the closest example of moral perfection. When you approached him, you might sweat just a little. And when he felt you were disturbing him in the sanctuary as he spoke, he would literally stop his sermon and give you a stare that you would never forget. You would never, ever talk again in the sanctuary. Today, rabbis are thankfully perceived very differently. I know that my stare scares absolutely no one, not even my own children. I also know in this day and age that none of you expects me to be perfect. But like any rabbi, I still try to be a good role model. I try to be the best person I can be, which is why I still cringe when I remember a situation several years ago that didn't reflect on what kind of role model I've always sought to be. I have a younger brother who lives here in Houston. We had always been close, but about 8 years ago, we had several arguments and disagreements. Too many unkind words and hurtful deeds. A major falling out. It was awful. He lived just 2 streets away. He was having babies and my children were becoming teenagers, and yet we didn't get to share any of those great life moments with each other. No holiday celebrations or birthday parties. When my parents would come to visit, they would have to divide up their weekends, time with his family and then completely separate time with my family. As awful as it was personally, I was embarrassed as a rabbi that I wasn't speaking with a family member. When he began to send his children to our preschool, more and more people discovered what was happening even though I was trying to hide it. I was a rabbi, trying to get more of you to repair your broken relationships, yet I couldn't even do it myself. Who was I to counsel others and offer advice? I know some of you have dealt or are still dealing with similar challenges. I see it often, way too often. Broken relationships with family members, business colleagues, lifelong friends, that lead to constant fights and arguments, or the missed simchas, the bar mitzvah when an uncle or grandparent is not invited, or a wedding when a parent doesn't even show up. The worst is what happens when there's a funeral. Siblings so angry with each other, they won't even meet with the rabbi in the same room. So we have to have 2 meetings with each camp to talk about a loved one who has passed. Instead of properly laying a loved one to rest, family members are filled with even more rage. The legacy of animosity and bitterness only continues. The anger only grows as life passes by. I know now how hard it can be. The fact is, we have plenty of resentment to go around. On a lighter note, the story is told of 3 elderly Jewish women who were seated on a bench in Miami Beach, each one bragging about how devoted their sons are. The first mother says, "My son is so devoted that last year for my birthday, he gave me an all-expenses-paid cruise around the world, first class." The second one says, "No, my son is more devoted. For my 75th birthday last year, he catered an affair for me and even gave me money to fly down my good friends from New York." The third mother says, "My son is the most devoted. 3 times a week he goes to a psychiatrist. $120 an hour he pays him. And what does he speak about the whole time? Me." That story, of course, has never happened amongst the Jewish people. With everything I have said, do you know what the saddest part of all is? The lost opportunities for repairing those relationships. Even when people hear that the person who hurt them has changed, they're told that they've confessed to their mistake. They feel truly bad about the lie they told, the rumor they spread, the pain that they caused. They sincerely want to repair the relationship they once had. Yet too often, I see people who believe it's just easier to ignore any attempts to reconcile. I'm always struck when people tell me they simply cannot forgive someone, even if they've changed, even if they demonstrated repentance. Over Yom Kippur, we'll talk a lot about repentance, known as teshuvah in our tradition. According to our sources, repentance must include a confession, remorse, an apology, reparation, and if necessary, justice must be served. But for some, even this is not enough. Many choose to never even open the door to the possibility of forgiving someone. Rather, they choose to continue to live with the bitterness. It's like there's an invisible barrier, one that may never be shared or can't even be articulated, but it's there, an invisible barrier to any sort of healing. Why do we sometimes not grant forgiveness? Perhaps in some perverse way it makes us feel empowered. We can hold something over someone. Even though then we force ourselves to live with the pain, we don't have to let that person off the hook. A psychiatrist friend once told me another reason. He said sometimes people don't let go because they would then be faced with the anxiety of having to deal with an unknown future. They think it's better to hold on to the present, unhealthy situation because at least that's the known. As bad as it may be, it's the devil they know. Yet too often, that unhealthy situation, that devil they know, can be toxic. As it's been said, holding a grudge is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. It can be like poison. In the words of one researcher, people who have been able to let go of the negative experiences and then forgive show clear health benefits. Whether we're looking at heart rate, blood pressure, their quality of sleep, the number of medications they are on, or the number of physical symptoms they report. Almost every way I've thought to measure it, people who have been able to think forgivingly show health benefits. Rabbi Abraham Tversky is a psychiatrist who works with addicts. Once a patient told him, carrying resentments is like letting someone who you don't like live inside your head rent-free. The great Rabbi Harold Kushner once taught, quote, "I knew a woman who had been mistreated by her husband and who 10 years after her divorce could still not surrender her rage. I counseled her. For 10 years you've been walking around with a hot poker in your hand, ready to throw it at your ex-husband. But you've never had the chance. All you've done is burn your own hand." And Rabbi Kushner also teaches, you can blame your parents for the pain you feel, but not for the pain you cause. Is there something about this holy day that can help those of us who need it? Years ago, Russian psychologist Alexandria Luria described a man who had an extraordinary memory. Show him a page of several hundred random numbers, and he could instantly remember them in order. Read an entire opera to him, and he could instantly recall all of it. You could then go up to him 15 years later, and he would still remember the entire opera word for word. So you would think that this man's life was fantastic. It turns out that the man would have done anything to have this special talent removed. His mind was so full, so overloaded with the negative experiences he wished he could forget. All the lies, the hurts, all the pain that others had caused him, the challenges of many relationships. The memories of other people's misdeeds, even the accidental ones, held him back from ever moving ahead with his life. In the end, he was miserable, withdrawn, alone in the world. There's a reason that in our prayers this Yom Kippur, we refer to God as Zocher HaNishkachot, the one who remembers all that is forgotten. On this all-important day, our rabbis emphasize to us only God can handle remembering everything. None of us should ever have to bear that terrible burden. Yes, as Jews, sometimes it is vital to remember, but sometimes it's just as important to forget. To forget can be a blessing. I should have known that forgetting is the first key to forgiveness. My brother knew. On the morning of Hurricane Harvey, I woke up to 2.5 feet of water in my home. Even though we had not spoken for a long time, the first call I got that morning was from my brother. He was offering to come help clean out our home. Fortunately, he had the personal strength and the deep-seated love to make that difficult call. He knew it was more important to forget all the negative things that happened. Yes, after having to spend 10 hours that day helping me move out my furniture, he may have wished that he wouldn't have called. But through that difficult day together, we quickly saw that it was time to forget what had happened so we could begin to forgive. No, we'll never be able to get those lost 8 years back. I wish we could have reconciled earlier, but we're now close again and now working every day to make up for some of what we did lose. Of course, I also wish I never would have gone through what I did. But I hope that through my experience, I can now help more of you, because I know how painful it can be, and I know the pain is there. In our congregation, there are too many cycles of destructive words, grudges, and broken relationships that continue year after year, sometimes Lador Vador, generation after generation. I see it, you see it, and I have lived it. That is one of the reasons why we have this holy day, to try to let go of what happened, to truly let go of what happened. Yom Kippur is our annual opportunity to clear out our memories so we can grant genuine forgiveness. Yes, it's a very challenging day, the most challenging day of the Jewish year. But interestingly enough, our tradition also considers it one of the happiest days of the year because of the great potential for all of us to begin again. When we do, giving forgiveness is not only a gift to the one who offended us, but it can also be a gift to ourselves, to stop being hurt by past events so we can live a life free of the bitterness, free of the pain, free of the insults and the injuries, the grudges and the grievances. Then that energy that consumed us by harboring resentments and nursing unhealed wounds, I have now seen firsthand that it can be freed up and put to much better use. Yes, of course, some injuries are very great, and I know it will take much more than a sermon on Yom Kippur to heal. But can this Yom Kippur inspire us to at least try to start a journey towards forgiveness? Over the next 24 hours, we will spend more time in this sanctuary than any other day of the year. Let us keep that all-important Yom Kippur idea with us. Only God can handle remembering everything. None of us should ever have to bear that terrible burden. By doing so, can we all be inspired to ask ourselves, what heavy baggage do I still carry that I must lay to rest? This time of year, no matter how big the walls may have been built up between you and a colleague, between you and a close friend, between you and a parent, between you and a child or even a spouse, now is the ideal Jewish time for working to forget so you can forgive. On this day, if we expect God to wipe the slate clean for all of us, can we try to do the same?